Good morning, this is Mark, and welcome to my mustard yellow apartment. I wish it was a little bit brighter in here, a little bit more fluorescent, but it's not, so I might appear just a little bit yellow because everything around me is yellow. So, anyways, I'm going to do a book reading. I just published the third of my Kyle Callahan mysteries. The first two were Murder at Pride Lodge and Pride and Perilous, which are part of a trilogy. The book I just published is not. The third book in the trilogy, Death by Pride, I'm working on now. I'm 6 chapters into that. But I just published Death in the Headlights, a Kyle Callahan mystery featuring Detective Linda. Detective Linda Sikorsky from the New Hope, Pennsylvania Police Force. She's in the other two books. I won't take up time with that, but she and Kyle make a really good pair, so all of these mysteries include them. And after writing 2 of those Pride trilogy books, I wanted to do a departure. I wanted to do something different, so I wrote, I'm calling it a gay cozy, cozy mysteries. It's a subgenre of mystery. It means that there's no sex or only implied sex. Very little violence, a small town environment, and usually a female protagonist, a female sleuth. In this case, it's Detective Linda. So, excuse me, I wanted to do that. And I did. And the book is now out. Now, before I get started, for anybody who's watching this clip, the book is also for 5 days available free on the Kindle. The print version should be in a couple days. I published through my own imprint, which is Mark Publishing, but CreateSpace sometimes can take 3, 4, 5 days to get the print edition up on Amazon, and then I write to Amazon, Kindle Direct Publishing, and say please combine them so it'll be one page with the print and ebook as the other two are. But right now, only the Kindle version is available. And for starting tomorrow, starting Sunday, it will be free, so grab it. And anyways, I'm going to do a reading from it. Death in the Headlights. There it is again. A Kyle Callahan mystery featuring Detective Linda. Chapter 1. Abigail Creek sat on her bed about to watch a horror movie. Halloween was 2 weeks away, but already the stations were playing reruns of The Exorcist and Friday the 13th versions 1 through 12. She'd only seen the first one. She didn't care much for sequels and was delighted that John Carpenter's original Halloween, 1978, with young Scream Queen Jamie Lee Curtis, was showing tonight. It was almost enough to make her glad she was too sick to go to dinner with the family. Correction, the family and Charlotte. The 5 of them were behaving as a unit more often since the divorce negotiations had reached their final phase. Abigail hated the act she'd put on throughout the process, pretending it was all fine with her, 62 years old and being usurped by a woman 20 years younger who was once her dearest friend, a woman she had introduced to her husband Clarence, a woman who had all but moved into Cross Creek Farm, befriending the family, preparing to become the new matriarch as Abigail graciously and quietly stepped aside. "Oh, have I got a surprise for you," she thought, settling in against the headboard with a bowl of freshly popped corn and a tall glass of Alka-Seltzer. She had no idea if it was the right thing to take for the stomach cramps that struck her late in the day, an unforeseen and sudden illness she attributed to the stresses she was under. She was feeling noticeably better now and thought she might be on the mend enough to enjoy the movie without doubling over in pain. Whatever it was passing. Too late for dinner with the others, but maybe that was why she had taken ill in the first place, a psychosomatic solution to a problem not easily solved. John Carpenter's simple, eerie score began as the movie started. Abigail couldn't believe it had been 36 years since she first saw the movie on its release, watching through her fingers at the scariest parts. Her heart felt a stab at the memory. She had been with Clarence then, in her mid-20s and madly in love. She had gripped his hand throughout the movie and had believed, then and up until just this past year, that she would be holding his hand until the day she died. "Let it go, Abby," she told herself. "He has betrayed you. Let it go. Set the trap. Pull the spring. Be patient." She had just taken her first handful of popcorn from the bowl when she heard it. A creaking sound. A footstep. A footstep? That's silly, she told herself, even as she felt the hair rise on her arms. It's just a creak. Why do you think they call it Cross Creek Farm? She asked herself, smiling. Cross Creek? Of course it creaks. It's old and large and empty. Empty except for Abigail and the alarm. Clarence always turned it on when he left. He kept it on when they were at home, too, unlike many homeowners who don't realize the most valuable thing they can protect is themselves. The only sound there should be reason to jump at was the alarm going off. She took another handful of popcorn and tried to focus on the movie. Jamie Lee was so young then, and now she made yogurt commercials, looking mature but still radiant. Abigail wondered if it was the yogurt that preserved her so well. The sound of a creak came again. It wasn't the sound of the house settling or floorboards adjusting to the cooler temperatures. It was the sound of someone in the house. Had one of them come home for some reason? Maybe her stomach problem was catching, but that made no sense. They'd driven in one car. Had they all returned? Clarence, she called out. Caroline, are you back already? There was no reply, and the creaking stopped. She reached for the remote and muted the television. She listened carefully in the silence. She knew better than to call out again. It was too late not to let an intruder know she'd heard him. Or had she simply heard the house moaning and settling? Then came the creak again, and she knew she was not alone. She slipped out of bed, looking quickly around for her cell phone. Where had she left it? In the kitchen? The living room? She heard the creak again, closer, coming toward her. She turned the volume back on to mask her movements, then slipped out of bed and hurried into the bathroom. It had 2 doors, one leading into the master bedroom where she was, another on the opposite side leading into the back hallway. It would put her behind the intruder, and she was now sure there was someone in the house. She could feel a presence. Danger was not something one simply imagines. It has a heaviness to it and a smell. Abigail smelled danger. The closer it came, the more pungent the threat. She quietly closed the bathroom door behind her, then dashed out into the back hallway. Her mind was racing. There was no time for a phone call, no time for the gun case. And what would she do with a gun she had never bothered learning to fire? That was Clarence's job, Clarence's gun. No, she needed out of the house, out into the darkness. She heard him coming then, running after her. Him, her. She didn't know and had no intention of finding out. No time for car keys, no time for weapons, no time. She ran through the kitchen and saw it, an open window above the sink. Had it been left open or unlocked? And wasn't it connected to the alarm that wasn't on? What difference could it make now? She had only her nightgown on and her slippers. It was cold outside, but not yet frigid. She dashed for the front door. Throwing it open, she breathed a gust of chill October air and thanked God for not abandoning her completely. Caroline and Rusty had gone for a bike ride that afternoon and left their bicycles in the driveway. Caroline's wasn't much of a bike, not one of the speedsters all the cyclists rode around this area. She had always wanted one like the bike she had as a child, and that's what Abigail grabbed now. Big, unwieldy, with handlebars that looked like antlers, a basket that never had anything in it, and pink. Abigail threw herself on the contraption, grateful she still knew how to ride, and pedaled furiously into the night. No lights on the roads here. Maybe that would help her. But then again, no people either. No sound. No one to hear her calling for help. Now, in the second chapter, Kyle and Danny, who are in the series, Danny Durbin is Kyle's partner, soon-to-be husband. But anyways, they go to visit Linda, Detective Linda. The second book takes place in Manhattan. But they go to rural New Jersey to visit Linda, where she has just inherited a small house on 5 acres in the woods from her aunt, who passed away watering the flowers in the backyard. So Kyle and Danny are there, Linda's there, and Linda's fiancée, Kirsten. Chapter 2. Thomas West, 3rd Baron de la Warr, died 1618, the namesake of Delaware in the Delaware River, the only remaining undammed river in the eastern United States. The river flows unimpeded for 330 miles from New York through Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware as it makes its way to the Atlantic Ocean. Not often thought of as mighty like its cousin, the Mississippi, It regularly overflows its banks in heavy rains and leaves its high water marks on many a home built close to the water. Linda Sikorsky had never been very curious about the river she now lived just a half mile from. She'd crossed it many times, back and forth from Pennsylvania to New Jersey, but it was simply a particularly lovely river to her. Then, in a stroke of serendipity tinged with grief, her Aunt Celeste died while watering the carnations on her back porch, in the little house she had owned in Kingwood Township, New Jersey, for some 40 years. She left the house and its 5 acres to Linda, not to her son Jeffrey, as the family assumed she would. Jeffrey was, by all accounts, no account, and had moved to North Carolina with his third or fourth wife, no one was sure of the number, remaining in touch with his mother through the occasional Mother's Day card when he remembered, and a visit every 3 to 5 years. That Celeste did not leave her house to him surprised no one. That she left it to Linda surprised only Linda. There really was no one else. Celeste's brother, Linda's father, Pete, had been dead for 35 years. Celeste's own husband passed on a decade ago. Linda had been the one to visit her nearly every weekend, sometimes more often, as age began to take its toll. But Celeste was determined to die on her property, if not in her bed, and it came as a relief to those who knew her, when she did. That was 3 months ago, and after making all the arrangements that needed to be made, signing all the paperwork, and dealing with a furious Jeffrey, who missed the funeral but showed up in time to be denied the keys to the house, Linda vacated her apartment in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and moved in, alone on 5 acres of woods, up a road with more deer on it than cars, just a short walk and a shorter drive from the river. It had all happened so fast. Her fiancé Kirsten had not moved with her. They weren't ready to cohabitate, and now she was about to have her first visitors, here for a week of country life, just 70 miles and a world away from the madhouse of Manhattan. I'm going to skip now. This chapter goes on. But they all go out to dinner in Stockton, New Jersey. Now, full disclosure, my husband, Frank, and I have a house in rural New Jersey. So I'm familiar with the area, and I use my life in my books. I live in New York City. That's in my books. But anyways, Kyle, Danny, Kirsten, and Linda all go out and have a lovely dinner in Stockton, and then they're on their way back. The 4 of them were driving home from dinner in Stockton. They'd had one of the best meals Kyle could remember ever having, enjoyed fireside in the old Miller Inn. He and Danny had driven by the place a few times on their trips to New Hope as they explored the surrounding area, but they had never eaten there. The meal had been exquisite, as had the company. Kyle and Danny had taken quickly to Kirsten, once she'd shown up at Kyle's photography exhibit. Her devotion to Linda was obvious, and the 4 of them had been talking about spending some real time together ever since. Tonight they were driving along Route 651, up toward Lockett Road, where Linda now lived. Kyle and Danny had arrived that afternoon after a leisurely Friday drive from New York City that included lunch and some shopping at the Flemington outlets. The day had been perfect, followed by a night of food, friendship, and memories. The only thing left was to visit a short while longer at the house and settle into the attic guest room for a cozy sleep beneath a thick down comforter. Linda was driving, chatting with Kirsten about the store she was planning to open. For Pete's sake, named after her late cop father, a vintage everything store she'd dreamed about ever since shopping at one she loved in Doylestown, Pennsylvania, several years ago. She'd been back a half-dozen times and made friends with Suzanne, the owner. Now she was getting advice from Suzanne on how to open her own store and not go out of business in 6 months. She had the location picked out in New Hope and had signed the lease agreement. So much change. Kyle was about to ask the women what they wanted for breakfast he'd promised to make, when the car suddenly slammed to a halt, jerking Kyle and Danny forward. Both were wearing seat belts, and Kyle felt the belt dig into his shoulder. "What happened?" Kyle said, worried they'd hit a deer. The animals were everywhere out here, and they often bounded out in front of cars. A collision could be fatal, and not just for the deer. But there'd been no collision, no thud, no impact. "There," Linda said, pointing out the driver's window to the side of the road. The car was stopped, and they all followed her line of sight to the left shoulder. Just beyond it, in a pile of leaves that had accumulated in the day's wind, was a woman next to a bicycle. Linda quickly unfastened her seatbelt and jumped from the car, followed instantly by the others. A moment later, all four of them were standing around a body, for it was a body at this point, clearly deceased, wondering what had happened. The woman was dressed in a nightgown and slippers, as if she'd fled on her bicycle at a moment's notice. The bike was what Kyle called a Wicked Witch of the West bike, large, with giant handlebars and a basket between them big enough to carry a small dog. The bicycle was pink with metallic flecks that shimmered in the beam of the keychain flashlight Linda used to scan the scene. "Call 911, she said, kneeling down to examine the body. "Already on it," Danny said, his cell phone to his ear as he reached a dispatcher and began explaining what they'd found and where they were. The dead woman was not young. She looked to be in her 60s. One of her slippers had come off in the collision, and it was clearly a collision. Someone hit this woman and kept going. Linda gently rolled the woman on her side for a better look. She aimed the tiny flashlight on the sad, dead face and gasped. "What?" said Kyle, thinking for a moment that life had been detected, that the woman's eyes had flickered or her chest had risen in a breath. "It's Abigail Creek," Linda said. "You know her?" "She stopped by the house last weekend," said Kirsten, "to welcome Linda. I was here. She was a lovely woman." "Was," Linda said. "She's not lovely now." The sounds of the night grew around them. Crickets, moving things. Kyle looked up at the full moon, shining its light through the trees and onto the road. This was no accident. Not in this light, not with a woman dressed as if she had been running from something. "Who is Abigail Creek?" Danny asked. "From Cross Creek Farm," Linda said. "Well, that explains everything." Danny already had a knot in his gut and wished they'd had dinner at the house. It just might. Linda gently brushed the woman's matted hair from her face. The four of them stood watch in the dark, waiting for an ambulance that would have no one to save. So now you get it. You get the gist of it. Abigail Creek from Cross Creek Farm is dead on the road. Danny and Kyle and Linda and Kirsten find her, and Kyle and Linda proceed into this mystery, into this spider's web to find who among the Creek family is the deadly spider. So that's the reading. Again, it's for 5 days. You can get it for free on the Kindle on Amazon. Then it goes up to $4.75. That's all of my books are $4.75. Although the first two books until Tuesday, I also did a free promotion on Murder at Pride Lodge and Pride and Perilous. Those are free till Tuesday. Then they go back up to $4.75. So I love writing this series. I'm really into the next book. It's Death by Pride. It takes place on Pride weekend in New York City. Linda comes to visit, of course. And it's the most evil killer yet. I love writing villains. This guy is really twisted and cold, and it's gonna have a shocking denouement in this one. So check it out. Hope you like them. Review them. Either way, if you read the books and pass it on. Thanks for sitting with me through the reading. Hope you liked it.